and lead me home.
Welcome to our Meet the Descendants panel discussion. I'm Oriana Gilmore, an interpreter at Historic Brattonsville, and your host for today's discussion. In this segment, we'll get to know a few more of our descendants here and learn about their personal experiences with tracing their lineage back to Brattonsville. To start this conversation, let's allow the descendants to introduce themselves. All right, Angela Green, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Green. I am from York, South Carolina, born and raised. Um, I am an educator. My familiarity with Brattonsville stems from the fact that growing up, I was always told that we had relatives at Brattonsville. I really didn't know what that meant. Fast forward many, many years. The next person on the panel is Dr. Lisa Bratton, who is my cousin, and she has done lots of research. I'll let her fill you in on that. And she helped me get a better understanding of our ancestry. So that's who I am.
Okay, thank you. I'm Dr. Lisa Bratton. I am from Vallejo, California, but 5 generations, my father and 4 generations behind him were from historic Brattonsville. I came to know about Brattonsville when I was a child. My parents would bring us from California to the Carolinas, sometime in the summer, sometime in December. And my father took us to Brattonsville, and I thought we were rich because it said Bratton on it, and there's all this land. So I said, wow, this is kind of great, we're rich. And so, you know, growing up, and I got a little older, and I thought that everybody knew where their plantation was. If you drive around in the South long enough, you'll see a plantation with your name on it. So Brattonsville just didn't mean, I didn't know how special it was. I didn't know that out of all the friends I had, past, present, no one knows where their exact plantation is. So that has really led me to believe how special Brattonsville is. And it's a treasure.
All right, and that's a great segue to our first question. Share with us who you're related to from the Bratton plantation. Which ancestor rather, who are you a relative to?
So Angela and I are both descendants of Green and Melinda Bratton. They were born sometime between 1825 and 1845. You know, as you know, with census and genealogy records, it's not an exact science when you're dealing with, especially African-American people born during enslavement. And so, as far as we know, they were both born in South Carolina, not sure if they were born at Brattonsville. And they worked for most of their adult lives at historic Brattonsville as enslaved people. Green and Melinda had 2 children together who lived to adulthood that we know of. Some of them kind of get lost in the census, and we're just not sure if they died or ran away, not sure. But my great-grandfather, who was William Bratton, and his brother Robert Bratton, and then William Bratton had 3 boys, and then was one of them was my grandfather, who was Walter Green Bratton, and then my father, John Walter Bratton, who had there were 12 boys and a girl in that family. So Green and Melinda were my great-great-grandparents who were enslaved at historic Brattonsville. And they went on to become the first freedmen to own land in York County. Now, they weren't the first African-Americans to own land in York County, because there were some free Blacks who owned land in York County. The McClurkson family and the Harry Reid family. Those are 2 of the families who owned land here, we believe. But Green and Melinda Bratton were the first freedmen to purchase land in York County.
And what inspired each of you to trace your ancestry? Did you find out, I know, Angela, you said you found out through family, but what other ways did you trace your ancestry back to Brattonsville, and how did you really get involved in that?
Well, I got involved, like I said, if we go back a little ways, I am a teacher. And so one of the field trips that students would always take was always to Brattonsville. And so, in the back of my mind, I knew the stories. I remember going to visit my great grandmama who lived not on the historic Brattonsville site, but she lived in Brattonsville somewhere. So we would go visit as when I was a child. So I knew that there was some type of connection, just didn't really know. And then but I was kind of curious. And then so I heard about this cousin, Lisa, who had written this book. And I thought, oh, wait, I need to meet her. I need to find out. And so it was at a family reunion. I read her book and I went, oh, there's actual real documentation. They're actually real people with real names, because I only knew as far as my great grandparents, which was the Robert that she mentioned a few minutes ago with the brothers. That was as far as I knew. I didn't know about Green and Melinda, or about the owning of land and that. So that really, really piqued my interest, because part of when I taught school, I taught Civil War, I taught Reconstruction. So the fact that I was able to go back to school and say, let me tell you my story of Reconstruction. Now that was pretty exciting. And of course the students, they were fifth graders, and they looked at me because they have no concept of time. So the fact that my great-great-grandparents were enslaved just blew their minds, because of course to them, that was a million years ago. So with each bit of information I learned, I just want to know more and more and more.
Okay. Oh, good. And for me, I believe I've always been interested. I remember being a child, my father took us to Brattonsville one particular time, and he took me to the land that Green and Melinda purchased that's still in our family. And he showed me where the lines were, and there was a piece of tape or a piece of plastic on a tree. And he said, that's where it goes here. But he showed me all the boundaries, just me and him out there walking in the country. And I was interested then. I didn't really know how to formulate questions and how to ask, but I remember that really well. And I think he took me because he could see that I was the one of the three children, the one who was really interested in this. And so on some level, I've always been interested in it. I like to hear my dad and his brothers talking about old time and, what it was like when they were young. I used to like to hear that. Maybe in the 1980s, I started to formalize some of the work and go down to Brattonsville and interview people that I saw that I thought might be able to shed some light on the story, interview my dad and his brothers and others who I thought, some of the sister-in-laws who also had information as well. So I think my interest has gone from, wow, I like this place because we're rich, all the way to studying the 150 years of documents that are housed at the University of South Carolina. So, Brattonsville really is a treasure in that regard, because not only is the plantation still standing, the physical buildings, but also some of the records have been maintained and they are in pristine condition. And to give you an idea, I say to myself, well, they saved everything. And they, even in the collection, the Bratton family papers, there is a receipt written on the back of a corn shuck. So if you have maintained and preserved a receipt on the back of a corn shuck, you saved everything.
Wow, that's really great. So when you were doing research to find out more about your families, what difficulties did you run into when tracing your lineage? And if you had any difficulties, how did you combat that?
Well, for me, I would ask relatives. My mom grew up in Brattonsville with the great grandma that I was mentioning to you. Well, my mom passed away many, many years ago, and so I didn't really have a chance to find out a lot from her. But I would try and speak with my aunts, and they didn't really want to talk about it. And it was more like it was not a fun time. It was a difficult time. So trying to get information from the older generation has been difficult from the ones that I've asked, because either they don't want to discuss it, or I'll ask, well, do you have any pictures or something? You know, you got a quilt, you got a script, something. And it's always nope, nope, no. And maybe there is something floating around and sitting in somebody's attic, but for me, it's been difficult to get people to open up and talk about the time when my mom and her sister were being raised in Brattonsville. So that's been my difficulty.
So maybe it's my approach because I interviewed my aunt, Willa Frances Bratton, who at the time I interviewed her, she might have been 95. She lived to be 99. So she lived in California. And so I went to her house. I hadn't seen her in a while. I went to her house to interview her. And she told me over the phone she didn't remember anything. And so I said, oh, okay, no problem. So I get to her house anyway. And she always called me by my whole name. She always called me Lisa Bratton. And so she said, Lisa Bratton, I don't remember anything. I already said I don't remember. I said, okay. So I plug up the recording equipment and get all set up, my notebook and everything's all set up. And so she said, I told you I don't remember anything. I said, okay, no problem. Well, just tell me about growing up in Brattonsville. She talked for 2 hours. She gave me conversations. She gave me, it was like I was there. And so we finished after 2 hours. I had to change the tape. And after 2 hours, I said, you know what, you're right. You don't remember anything. And we had a really good laugh about that. So try that. Just go and just start hooking up equipment and see what happens. But as African Americans, we always run into what we call in genealogy a brick wall. So usually around the 1870 census is the first time that African Americans were recorded on the census. Before that, if you are quote unquote lucky, if you want to use that term, you might find them on a slave schedule. But a slave schedule might just say, it would be of a particular plantation owner, and it might just say men age 0 to 12, got 3 of them. Men age 15 to 30, got 4 of them. So that's the only way that, oftentimes the only way we were recorded. In the case of Brattonsville, they did keep names of enslaved people. So we do have a little bit more information there. We have some first names. But what I really do want people to understand is that it wasn't a case like in the movies, Django and 12 Years a Slave and other movies, you see massive, massive plantations, and the depiction, or sometimes you walk away with the incorrect understanding that all the whites in the South were rich and all the blacks in the South were enslaved. Untrue. Most of the most of the whites who had slaves, very small percentage. And the ones who did have slaves, hold people in bondage against their will, had maybe 1 or 2, and they were out in the field, the whites were out in the field working as well. So we want to definitely get rid of that, gone with the wind kind of notion. So, and the Brattons actually were, in the top, as far as wealth goes, they were in the top, percentage of that. I don't say that with pride, I just say that as a fact. So, but we run into a brick wall because in 1870 is the first time that African Americans are recognized as human beings from the federal government as it relates to the census. So oftentimes we get to 1870 and we have to end there. If you're fortunate enough to have a death certificate, that'll get you 1 more generation back because it will give the name of that person's parent. But those are pretty rare as well. But those are some of the challenges that we meet as genealogists if we're researching African-American ancestors.
All right, and so I know you talked about the limitations because of the limit of whether birth certificates or death certificates, but so how far back have you been able to trace? Do you know what year or around what year you've been able to trace your family's history?
The furthest I've been able to go back is with Green and Melinda. As I mentioned, they were born sometime between 1825 and 1845, depending on which document you believe or has the most validity. So we are not able to have any information about their parents, except in one of the documents that I have from the Bratton store, it says that they bought an item for mother. It doesn't say if it's Green's mother or Melinda's mother. It doesn't say her name. And I wish that it did, but it has no name. So sometimes my student at Tuskegee University will ask me, you know, why did people stay on a plantation after enslavement? Why didn't everybody just leave? Why are they going to stay there? So one reason could be that Green and Melinda had an older parent living there who couldn't or wouldn't or did not want to travel. But we do know that there was a mother that was on the plantation as well. And that's all the information we have about her, tragically.
All right, so when you both found out about your ancestors, you started to learn more about them, especially with having documents to look back on and find names and things like that. How did you feel when you found out who they were? What were those feelings like?
I was shocked and proud and just in amazement. You know, who can give names of relatives that far back? Most people can't. And to have names and definite information, it was mind blowing. And ever since then, my daughter and I would volunteer at Brattonsville. She was a junior docent. I think she might have been in the 6th grade. So we spent the night in a cabin, in a slave cabin. That was quite the experience. And waking up the next morning, and it was so pretty. It was in September, and it was so pretty, and it was still quiet, and it was a beautiful day, and the wind was blowing, and it was almost as though you could just feel the presence of your ancestors, and you wake up and you think, this is the same thing that my great-great-grandparents saw. This is the same tree. It might have been a whole lot smaller at that time, but still, this is what they saw. This is the air that they breathe. And so it was just really an amazing feeling to be able to get in touch with your roots.
Yeah, and for me, Green Bratton has always been on our mantle. Picture of him has been on our mantle since I can remember. And I do remember one day asking my father, who's that man? And he said, that's Green Bratton. But he didn't really say much more. My father was born in 1917, he's an older dad. And Green Bratton died around 1917. So Green Bratton might have known that my father existed, maybe, but he didn't talk really a whole lot about him as such. But he talked a lot about the land and a lot about, you know, the importance of keeping the land in the family. So I did want to, Angela mentioned sleeping in the slave cabin. And so we started this, oh my goodness, when was it? Maybe 10 years ago. There's a historic preservationist by the name of Joseph McGill. And he travels around the country and sleeps overnight in places where people have been enslaved. And so when he wanted to come to Brattonsville, the staff and management of Brattonsville said, well, that's fine, but you have to clear that with the Descendants. And so we met with him, maybe over the phone. I don't remember exactly now, but we met with him, might have been in person. And so I said, can I come too? I'm gonna stay the night too. And nobody believed I was gonna do it. Right? Oh yes, of course. So there were 4 of us, myself, a man who sleeps in shackles, and another woman by the name of Prenny Anderson, who is the, hope I can get this right, the great-great-grandniece of Thomas Jefferson, maybe. Hope that's correct, Prenny, sorry if it's not. So this was a really interesting experience for me because we had one of the staff members at Historic Brattonsville cook some food over the open fire for us. And then so we're getting our gear and preparing to go across the street to sleep in the cabin. And so it was just a surreal experience for me because just walking from the car to the cabin. It's across the street. But you should have seen us. We had the worst time. Well, watch out for the ditch. Oh, I don't know. Well, wait a minute. Can you hold the light over here? So wait, I'm about to drop my chair. Hold on. I mean, it was an ordeal getting across the street. So I took myself back and channeled Harriet Tubman and other enslaved people who walked hundreds of miles for their freedom, and we can't even get across the street. And then I had to think about the whole situation is so different. I don't have a price on my head. I can get tired of this and call my cousin Jerron or Dwight or anybody and say, okay, I'm tired of this experience. I'm on my way. I got a credit card. I can go to a hotel. I can drive myself back to Atlanta. So all of that, and we couldn't even get across the street. It gave me a completely different appreciation for what our people did to get out of enslavement. It just blew me away. I'm still just kind of full about it. So since then, we had that night, and since then, I've stayed with Angela one night. I've stayed with a member of the Rock Hill School Board, Wendy Cole, one night. I stayed twice. My students have come down. The mom came from Louisiana, picked the daughter up at Tuskegee, and came to Brattonsville. And the three of us stayed the night. And once I was telling another group of students a different semester, I said, well, you know, they say that the big house is haunted, that I've heard this from staff people for the last 20 years, different staff members. For example, they try to open the door and it won't open. And then a Black person try to open the door, it won't open. And then a white person comes, they try to open the door and it opens. I said, oh, okay. And you guys want to stay in the big house? They're like, at first, no, but then they said yes. I said, okay. So we stayed in the big house 1 year and nothing happened. I was ready for Harriet. She decided to show up, but she didn't. So that's just another, I mean, it's been a really good experience being able to do that. But that whole process of spending the night before Sweat of Our Brow started with the historic preservation of Joseph McGill.
Those are very wonderful experiences to have gone through. I couldn't imagine what that would feel like. And also we have Mr. Winston Bagley who has joined us. He's another fellow descendant. Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Winston?
Yes, I'm Winston Bagley. I live currently in Gastonia, North Carolina, and I'm a descendant of Sam and Amy Smith. And is there anything else that I should share in terms of the introduction?
I'm sure. Go ahead and share with us how you became involved with Brattonsville and how you traced your lineage back to Brattonsville. Okay. How did you find out that you were related to Sam and Amy?
Well, I knew for a while that my family was descendants of the Brattonville plantation, but I had never really taken the initiative to go down and really research it. And I want to thank Dr. Bratton because she was awesome in terms of helping me see some things that I learned about Sam and Amy. And it were my great-great-grandparents. And I'm still in the process of actually pulling records, but early in the event, Dr. Lisa Bratton shared a document that she had found in some of her research. And I think Dr. Bratton found those down in Columbia, if I'm not mistaken. But one way or the other, I can't describe to you the feeling. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that's had that kind of experience where you learn information, you find out things about your past, and it just does something to you that won't let you stop. It starts with shivers going through your body, and then from there, you just continue to turn pages and reach out to other people who may have known something, and you find out about relatives that you never knew about before. You learn stories, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who have had the opportunity to visit the Brattonsville site. There were a lot of people who have if they've not actually been there physically, they've had an opportunity to go to the website and take a look at By the Sweat of Our Brow and some of what the historic Brattonsville project is all about. And for those of us who had not until recent years, and it's probably been about 10 years for me now, but prior to that, we found that our parents, our families had sort of a disparaging attitude about slavery. They didn't necessarily look at it as something to be proud of. As a matter of fact, it was the exact opposite, and they just didn't want to have a lot to do with the heritage of slavery. But when it's all said and done, we know now that because of their strength, we're here to tell that story. We're here to kind of turn that thing around and look at it not from a perspective of disparagement, but from one of pride, one of saying, you know, my foreparents, my great-great-grandfather was Sam Smith, and my mother bears the name of his wife, Amy. And when it's all said and done, as we go back and we trace that lineage, we continue to find things that make us even more proud. I was able to discover Amy and Sam's headstone at McConnell's, and well, that's actually Mount Zion Baptist Church there in McConnell's. And it was like everything just started from scratch again. I mean, because I couldn't move once I saw that. I just stood there. I think I sent you a copy of that picture, Oriana. But it's one of those experiences where once you get started, you're addicted. And from there, you are so enthused and excited about it. You want to encourage other people to do what you've done, to have that same experience for themselves.
Thank you for sharing that. And you all have already touched on the difficulty with getting older family members to talk about growing up on the plantation, as whether they were a sharecropper family or talking about their relatives who were enslaved. Do you have any family members now who seem kind of distant to the idea of working with Brattonsville or volunteering, continuing to tell those stories? And if so, how do you deal with that? What do you tell those family members?
Yes. I mentioned earlier that my daughter, she's 16 now, and she likes history. And so she embraced the culture. She had her authentic costume made, or so that she could be a junior docent at Brattonsville. My son is 18. He had the exact opposite reaction. He didn't want to come. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. In his opinion, we were embracing slavery. And I kept trying to tell him, his name is Zion. Zion, no, we're not embracing slavery. We're embracing our ancestors. This is our family. You know, we can actually talk about our family members, and had it not been for them, we wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here. But he's not really hearing that. All he hears is the word slave, and that's it. I've tried to get other family members who are younger. By younger, I mean 30, 40, 50, 20s. Come on out to Brattonsville. Come on out. Serve on the committee. You know, we're planning for Sweat of Our Brow. Come on. No. In case any of them are watching this, some of them have come. And they have participated, and they have been to the family reunion, and they have brought their children with them. So I'm not talking about everybody. So let me make sure I put that disclaimer in there. I don't want somebody getting mad at me. But it has been difficult trying to get people to work, to come to the meetings, to help to plan. So that has been a challenge. And I just keep trying to, just bring home the point of this is family. You know, be proud. Look at where you are because of them. It hasn't worked yet, but I'll keep trying.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences like that. getting people to come out and volunteer is a challenge. And getting people to volunteer anywhere sometimes is a challenge. So getting them to volunteer at Brattonsville is equally the same challenge. I find that when we have a big event, sometimes family members will come out. We did, the year that we honored Green and Melinda at Historic Brattonsville by the sweat of our brow, we had family members come from California, Utah, Texas, DC area, Atlanta, York County, Charlotte. There were a lot of us there at that event. It took a little bit of arm twisting, but not much, you know, okay, because they'll say, Lisa, you didn't twist my arm. Well, I did a little arm twisting of some people because I had to impress upon them, Historic Brattonsville is honoring our great-great-grandfather. How could you not be there? Is that legal? I mean, really? So, you know, and we started early and people really did. I have to hand it to them. They really did come out, and some who hadn't been to Brattonsville in years, who live right around the area. Also, excuse me, during the family reunion this year, we had a Bratton Williamson reunion. Williamson, my grandmother, Mary Williamson Bratton, is also from the area. So we did the Bratton Williamson reunion, and we brought several carloads. I don't know how many people we brought this year to by the sweat of our brow. For some of them, it was their first time. Some of them were children, and it was their first time coming. And I gave the tour, and I gave it my way. And so people said, you know, that they really enjoyed it and liked it. And matter of fact, yesterday, I got a phone call from a cousin in California who I've never met. She's 12, and she's doing a school project. She called another cousin to get the family history. So the cousin called me and said, you know, is it okay if this young lady calls you? I said, oh, of course. So she called, and I gave her a lot of the family history. She recorded it, so she's doing her school project on that. So it's still continuing. People, I think, are interested, but they have different ways of showing their interest. Angela and I and Winston, we will do whatever we need to do for Brattonsville. Other people show their interest in different ways. And I have one cousin that said, oh, maybe she's like your son. I was there 2 years ago. Okay, years ago, really? And you just live in Atlanta, and I'm telling you to ride down here with me. So for some people, it is a badge of shame. For me, I have never, I don't think even as a child, was I ever ashamed of my family's legacy of enslavement. My family has a legacy of enslavement. Okay. So now, what are you gonna do with that? Are you gonna sit back, oh, my family has a legacy of enslavement, I'm just poor me? No, I'm gonna take it and embrace it and talk about where they came from and how relevant their descendants are. I can't have a PhD in African-American history and not talk about my family legacy. That should be illegal.
I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, there's been some different attitudes here and there, and they seem to come and go depending on the enthusiasm of other people. So when I talk to somebody who really is interested in learning more about Brattonsville, they get excited. They'll call somebody that I've already spoken with who has been sort of like, okay, no, it's too hot, or no, just don't want to go there. And all of a sudden, they're back in the middle. And instead of having a disappointing attitude about it, you just have to grab them when you can, pull them back in there, and sooner or later, they'll have that same kind of experience that hooks them back into the process and engages them to dig a little bit deeper. And by the way, Lisa, I did find out that Amy, my great-great-grandmother, was a Bratton. So we got those ties. So when it's all said and done, we may skip over some information and learn about it later. But I want to pull those records and see those and set them aside for myself And I had mentioned earlier that, I want to preserve it in some kind of presentation so that, I can share it with other family members so that hopefully they'll catch on, they'll catch that fever and just want to learn a little bit more. And even when they don't, they may have a couple of tidbits of information that kind of help tie some things together for you that you never knew. I'm not as enthused about going over and staying in the buildings like Lisa, but I'm going to be there for the sweat of our brow when we meet multiple times during the year. I'm going to be there. I'm still trying to get nieces and nephews, and to be honest, more of them now are not as resistant to the idea of learning more about their heritage as far as slavery is concerned. They're more resistant to being out there in September, when it's still just hot. But I think there are some other ways, some other things that we can do to kind of get them engaged as well and kind of keep them hooked into the process. We've been doing the 7 Sacred Families each year. And I think there are some things that we can do to build on that so that we can build that story into what the sweat of our brow is supposed to be about in terms of actually celebrating those families and encouraging people who do come out to feel good about telling the stories about their parts of the family. Because I feel like all of us are part of the Brattonsville family.
Yeah. I did also want to mention the work of Kelvin Hopkinson. Yes, who couldn't be on the call today, but he and I have both had our DNA tested through Ancestry.com, and he has invited everyone with a Bratton connection, no matter how far back they are. He had invited them to Sweat of Our Brow. So he started inviting people before the pandemic hit, of course, not knowing that was going to happen, but he had invited several, I think everyone with a Bratton Williamson connection he invited. So we'll just have to he'll have to redo the invitation and let people know that now we're going to be virtual, but hopefully that will mean that we have a lot of Bratton family members who now will be interested. And I've reached out to quite a few, not as many as he has, but I reached out to quite a few, and some of them have never heard of Brattonsville. They didn't know about York County, because these are people who were kind of maybe like a second, third, or fourth cousin I have been reaching out to if I looked at their profile and thought they might have a little bit of information. So, but I did just want to acknowledge his work and what he has done to try to bring some of the family members together who've had their DNA tested. And also what we have planning in the works is a conversation between Black descendants and white descendants. I have been wanting to do this conversation since 2003 when we had one here at Brattonsville, and I wanted to go, but I didn't want anybody to start anything. So this is before I got involved with Brattonsville. I really didn't know. I was very suspicious. Okay, why are they inviting us to this? So I said, well, I'm going, but I'm not going by myself. So I got a bunch of people together, family members together to come down with me. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. People were very nice, but the conversation was very sterile. We talked about the weather, we talked about the food, we talked, and Congressman John Spratt was there. That was my first time meeting him. And I didn't know, but he was become one of my biggest cheerleaders behind the scenes. I would find out he'd done something for me. I don't find out till 3 years later. So, but I've spoken with his daughter recently, and she is very amenable to beginning this conversation. So we're hoping to do it this month with the Descendants on some level, but not a knockdown, drag out. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in name calling. I'm not interested in passing blame. I'm not interested in anything that's not going to be productive. A conversation, because you won't be able to understand the other side until you talk to the other side. So that is another piece that we have coming up hopefully very soon.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So we did touch on this a little bit, talking about family members, like Angela talked about her son not wanting to have anything to do with a site where slavery happened. So do you all believe there's still a stigma placed on the enslaved ancestors? And if so, how do you think we can combat this? You kind of touched on it a little bit about things that we can do in the future, but how could we get rid of that stigma against the enslaved ancestors?
Part of what we've already discussed opens that door. If we just get the door cracked a little bit, we may not get every person that we come in contact with, but we will win some other people over to do their own thing in terms of searching. And it's difficult when they don't have the necessary tools right there available to them. But I did find out that there are a lot of tools that are accessible at no cost now. Ancestry.com, some of the others, name one of the other.
23andMe.
Yeah, but either way, those are going to come with an annual fee. And a lot of people don't want to have to go through that. If you do your genealogy, it's going to give you a lot of information. Now, that's something I'm planning on doing within the next couple of months now that I've retired and I've got some time on my hands. Because again, I think that will actually help connect us closer to what we're working towards. In addition, the stories that we tell each other in our own families are stories that need to be tied back in, and we can, and if we're not going to take the time to do the research, when we hear those stories, we can kind of grab hold of them and find out whatever we can. The McKelvey Center, the center in Columbia, they're great resources, but a lot of our family are not going to get up and do that. They haven't gotten to that point yet. So it's going to be the Lisa Brattons, and it's going to be, the rest of us who will actually have to connect those dots to the extent possible. And there's going to be some frustration, but I think when you have an opportunity to read just a tidbit about your ancestors, and some of that's on the website about Sam that I mentioned, some of the papers from Hyde Smith, the documentation of some of the other enslaved ancestors that they're on record somewhere, but they're not going to get up and come find us. We have to get up and go out and search for them a little harder. And those are the kinds of things that when we put in front of our other family, all of a sudden, they start to realize some of the same things that have come, to point for us in terms of it took strength to endure slavery. It took smarts to endure slavery. It took teamwork to endure slavery. And they made it not because of anything other than the fact that they were smart, that they were willing to work as a team. They were willing to sing the songs and do whatever it took to make sure that they communicated with each other. And we have to, what we have to do in terms of getting our other family members engaged is nothing compared to what they had to endure to get through slavery.
So you mentioned resources, and I just want to put this additional resource out there for people. So at my local library in DeKalb County, Georgia, the Ancestry program is free if you're in the library. You can purchase a subscription for it, but it's free if you go into the library. So now during the pandemic, when the library is closed, they have made it accessible for you to use it at home. So that's my library, and perhaps other libraries around the country. For people who are watching, your library may be doing the same. So check and see if that's the case. While the library is closed, you can have it free at home.
That's a good point. Thank you.
All right. So how important do you believe it is for African Americans to know their ancestry? And why do you think it's important?
I think it's important because, as we mentioned, with my son, you would think with all the time that I've spent at Brattonsville that wouldn't be his reaction, but he also is a part of the world. And as you look around, and since I was a teacher, I know a lot of my fellow educators are very hesitant about teaching the Civil War aspect or the Reconstruction aspect, because everybody is very sensitive, and there have been teachers who have lost their jobs for giving out an assignment that was approved by the state, but then a parent got mad, and then boom, it blew up, and it might become world news. So it's very difficult to instill pride and motivation and encouragement when people are walking on eggshells. And so it's a difficult journey, but I think in a larger picture, people are going to have to be comfortable talking about our history and talking about the negative aspects of it, and stating the facts. Don't water it down, but at the same time, don't, make it bigger than it was, because it was big enough by itself without adding extra to it. Like Lisa said, the gone with the wind effect, so to speak. So we're just with a whole lot more education, sensitivity, just being upfront about what happened during that time period is what we're going to have to use to get people to embrace our culture, understand our culture, be okay with the knowledge that this is where we came from, and we're moving forward on the shoulders of our ancestors. So I'm not exactly sure if I answered your question, but there you go.
You did. That was a great.
It is important. It is of vital importance. And I think about instances where our young people have been so miseducated. I was miseducated. I went to private school and gifted class and all that. I was miseducated about African American and African history. So even yesterday, I was teaching my class at Tuskegee Online, and we talking about Timbuktu. And so many students said, I didn't even know Timbuktu was a real place. I said, yeah, it's a real place. It's like a center of learning and commerce in West Africa. But they didn't know that. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the school system, but it's that they have been so miseducated. And I'll share one experience with you. I will never, ever forget this. I used to substitute teach in the 80s. And I was at one of they would probably at that time call one of the worst schools in Atlanta. And so, no one cares what the substitute does as long as you keep order and you're not sending kids to the principal's office and all that. So I would bring in my African clothing, some artwork, some music, some wraps that the young people could try on. I would bring in my gear, and they loved it. So I will never forget, once at this school in Atlanta, I was showing them I had the map down, and I was talking to them about different places in Africa. And next thing I know, these third graders have kind of rushed me, and they are arguing over what part of Africa they're from. I'm okay, all right. So everybody's gonna get a chance. Next thing I know, over the loudspeaker, Miss Bratton, could you please bring your class down? Your class is 20 minutes late for lunch. Like, in a whole room full of third graders, no one said, it's the lunchtime, it's the lunchtime. Nobody. So that at the worst school in Atlanta. And that told me these students are hungry to learn. They want to know. And it's the school systems in this country that have blocked that and stand to gain if our students are kept ignorant of their own heritage. So that is when they're ignorant as young, and I don't mean that in an ugly way, I just mean that to say they don't know. So by the time they get, Angela, 30, 40, 50, 60, they are of the mindset that it's to be ashamed, that there's something to be ashamed of. Had they been in that class in third grade, the students late for lunch, that ignited something in them. and they wanted to know more. I said, all right, we'll finish it when we get back. Come on, grab your stuff. We got to go to lunch. But they really wanted to know. So it's up to us to spread this. And it's up to us to try to re-educate some of the people in our family too, who have been so sorely miseducated through no fault of their own.
Mr. Winston, did you have anything to add to that?
I think about the times that I took my son and my nephews and nieces down to Brattonsville and tried to connect the dots earlier in the time period when I really wanted to know more myself. And I think it's important that you really help them get a thorough understanding of I feel like I'm repeating this, but what the strength that it takes to endure something like slavery. And there's really no way to compare that to today's generation. So we have to find things that we know that they can connect with. And my son is in his 30s now. So he's at a point where if he hears about, somebody that knows anything about Brattonsville, he's got something to talk about. Now, he lives in Texas, but every now and then he'll call and say, I met so-and-so, and they knew about Brattonsville, and they said that they had ancestors there at Brattonsville. I think planting those seeds and continuously searching for things that you feel like would be of interest to not just those kids that are in their 20s and 30s, but those kids that, like Dr. Bratton had said earlier, who are going to get hooked into your story, will also help them get hooked and, search out some things on their own. And using something like Ancestry or genealogy and something in me, I can't remember.
23andMe and African Ancestry.
Yeah. Those aren't necessarily toys. So when you connect one dot, it's a real dot. That that's somebody that you're really related to, and you can actually not only learn about that person, but you can learn about people that may not have been related to you, but they may have had some of the same experiences at the same time in the same place. And those students bringing that kind of information back to you kind of lets you know that you've planted a fertile seed. And that's what you really want to do. Just kind of plant that seed and help them kind of search things out on their own. Some of them are going to do it because they want you to be proud of them. Some of them are going to do it because they really want to be able to share something with their own families or parents. But at some point, once that happens, once that seed is planted, some of them are going to get hooked. And when they get hooked, it's a good thing for all of us because they can unturn some stones that maybe you and I overlooked, and things really start to unfold that will help us move forward. I'm still enthused about it. I think my son is still enthused about it. So we don't need to give up on them. We just need to kind of use the information and the documents that we find to kind of help them see a little further down the road in terms of how far things go back. And
all right, thank you for those responses. We do have one last question. What does being an African-American descendant of Brattonsville mean to you?
Okay. To me, it says that I do have an opportunity to really connect and find out more about my heritage, find out more. The thing that gets to me sometimes is that so much stuff comes up in one search that I get distracted. And I don't know if that happens to anybody else, but I might get turned in 2 or 3 different directions. And then I get frustrated because, you know, I realize that I do need help. I do need someone that I can team up with, someone that's as excited about learning some of this information as I am, to kind of help dig through some of the information that will help tell the whole story. And there, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with Sam came from another farm that was in the Bethesda, Brattonsville area. And when he came there, Dr. Bratton owed money. He couldn't pay it back. I'm talking about Hyde Smith could not repay him. So Dr. Bratton went into a barter agreement. And after a year, he collected and said, the agreement was, if you can't pay me back a year after this date, and I share that document, and it's already on the Brattonsville site, but if you can't pay after a year, then I get Sam. And as I studied, I found out that that was not the first time or the last time that he did that. And I don't know if any of you have had a chance to really just look at any of the information that's on the website, but Dr. Bratton had a way of making people who couldn't pay him back in cash pay him back, and at the same time move forward. But those stories are opportunities to at least make some connections. And I have not been as successful in terms of making connections at that Smith farm or whatever it was that Hyde Smith owned. But that's something that I know there's some records somewhere on, and I'll be continuing to dig on them. So for me, it's a point of pride. And like I said, to see your great-great-grandparents' headstones, to actually be able to walk the land and that you know that they lived on and that they helped nourish and cultivate, is something that I'm proud of, and something that I hope I can plant enough seeds in the minds of my son and others in our family that will help us become even more knowledgeable about our experiences with the Brattons and the Smiths and the whole 9 yards.
For me, being a descendant means that I know that I come from a very strong foundation, and upon that I can build. So anytime something comes up, and I don't remember what was going on at that particular moment in time, but I remember I looked at, I think it was my daughter, which of course, like I said, she is the one that is involved in Brattonsville. And I think she was wigging out about school or something, and she does very well. She's an honor student, gifted, you know, sometimes if you make a B, whoa. And so, and so I said, you come from Green and Melinda Bratton. If they can handle being enslaved at Brattonsville, I think you can handle this class. Suck it up. And so that's kind of what my approach. You know, we're strong. So something that might send somebody else spiraling, we're not doing that. So I bring strength from that. That's what I get from it, and pride.
Yeah, and I definitely echo both of those sentiments. And I wanted to add the economic piece, because Green and Melinda, when they purchased the land, and my father always told us that Green Bratton was given the land by his white father, because that's what someone told my father. So he passed it on to me. But in my research, I find that Green Bratton wasn't given anything. He worked for that land, and the documents bear that out, that how hard he worked for that land. And then one of the documents even says that he paid off the balance of the land 13 days early. So I carry that as a badge of honor, because I've made some pretty good financial decisions in my life, thanks to my father, who wasn't afraid to talk to us about money, wasn't afraid to talk to us about equity and real estate. And we're in elementary school and he's telling us that we have to get equity in a house. I'm like, okay, fine. I don't even know what that is, but he says I have to have it. And so I stand on the economic and the financial legacy that they left for us. The land that Green Bratton purchased in 1870s is still in the family. We still pay the taxes on it. And that land isn't going anywhere. If I have to eat tuna fish and beans for the rest of my life, I pay the taxes on the land, make sure that that's done. So my mom pays it, you know, but if there's ever any trouble or any problem, but so the financial piece and being able to go back to the land that they purchased during enslavement is an important part of our legacy to me. And so there's a lot of pride there. I don't feel ashamed of that. I feel, look where we came from. Now, had Green and Melinda been able to live up to their full potential as politicians, as teachers, as whatever, our story would look a lot different, but they hadn't. They weren't able to do that. And so it's up to me and to our generation to make sure that they didn't stay enslaved for nothing, that we take that legacy, as Angela said, and build on it. And so I know that the three of us are trying, several other family members also are working hard to make sure that they weren't enslaved in vain. And I appreciate them. And I definitely love and appreciate my father for telling me all of this as a child, as a little, and and being proud. So how proud my father was of it. So it never occurred to me to be ashamed of it. He never was ashamed of it at all. So, by bringing me on the land and showing me, and I said, oh, he's proud of it. I guess like I'm supposed to have equity in a house, I guess I'm supposed to be proud about the land too. It's just, it was very natural. And I appreciate that and love him for that.
All right, well, those have been all the questions for today's discussion. Is there anything else that you all would like to share that I did not ask about today?
I will just make one comment about Brattonsville, the transition and the evolution of Brattonsville. When we first started getting mail from Brattonsville in the 1970s, my parents were living in Charlotte then, so they got mail, and it would say, come out and learn about Colonel Bratton, and come out and learn about the architecture of the, we didn't want to learn about the house, and we didn't want to hear about how wonderful Colonel Bratton was either. We didn't want to know about how fabulous John Simpson Bratton was and how he made the plantation a success. I don't want to hear that. So we never came. So it wasn't until maybe the 80s or 90s, or really, I guess that meeting in 2003, when I even felt welcome at Brattonsville. Now, we would come and walk around the grounds, before it became a historic site. We would come all the time. I'd take make the kids come. I'm in my 20s, and I'm make all the children come. They don't want to come. But then once we get here and I start talking to them about it, what little bit I knew then, they don't want to leave. And I got to force them to leave. So, but Brattonsville has really made a transition. Maybe in the 90s, you couldn't say the name Rufus Bratton, the murderer and Klansman and white supremacist. You couldn't say that name. They're like, oh yeah, well, we're going to tell that story. I'll pull you over to the side and we can talk about Rufus, but and it was very hush hush. And so now when you come to Brattonsville, they will talk to you about Rufus and talk to you about, talk about some of the more difficult stories of enslavement. And it's fine to me to talk about the architecture, but let's talk about who built these houses and who was exploited to make the white Brattons rich. Let's talk about that. So Brattonsville has come a long way in terms of hiring African-American interpreters. That was unheard of in the 70s. It's like, if you're not talking about how wonderful the Brattons are, they're not going to have a conversation with you. So I do appreciate the progression that Brattonsville has made, the progress they have made in telling some of the more difficult stories.
And I think it's important that we continue to do exactly what's happening now, which is get more people involved. Get more people involved, because when they're engaged like you're engaging us now, they want to dig deeper and find out a little bit more information. I can certainly appreciate the comments that Dr. Bratton just shared in terms of recognizing that it's not all about John S. Bratton. It's about the legacy of those people that helped him become whatever he became, but it's not just about that. And we have to be willing to help turn that page and look at some of the other people that have gone on and beyond Brattonsville to make something of themselves, and especially those that were there enslaved. I share that sentiment. I don't necessarily want to learn more about the property. I do think it's important for us to continue to do some of the things that I know have at least been talked about. Now, how far along are we in terms of them doing more things to find out where the exact buildings were that are no longer standing on the property, and going back to actually find remnants of our past, because those would be things that belong to those who were enslaved under the Brattonsville history. But I guess I'm more encouraged at knowing that if we engage each other, if we would just continue to do what we're doing, and to make sure that we're telling the African-American side of that story, and knowing that we can go back as far as we possibly can. And some of us may not get much further than Brattonsville, but knowing that we've gone back as far as we can is going to be something that will help us help our own as we move forward in life.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for having this conversation. I think you all have very great experiences to share and advice to share as far as getting through that stigma of slavery and keep pushing for African American history to be shared. So this will conclude our discussion for today. And thank you for tuning in to the Descendants panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And lead me home.